The street smelled like rot. It always did. But after a heavy rain in 17th century London, it got worse. Because the floodwater dragged everything with it. Garbage, human waste, and the bodies of dead cats and dogs that had been lying in the gutters for weeks, rotting in the open air. Londoners would lean out from their windows watching the water rush through the narrow streets below and see exactly that. Dead animals swept along in the flood. And somewhere in that moment, that grim, unglamorous, deeply unpleasant moment, a phrase was born. One you probably even said it this week without thinking twice about it. Because today, raining cats and dogs just means it's raining hard. A real downpour. You say it casually, maybe with a little smile. It's so baked into the English language that nobody stops to question it anymore. But the story behind it started somewhere much darker than you'd expect. And getting there means going back to one of the most unpleasant cities in the history of the world. London in the 1600s and 1700s was not the city you picture today. There were no sewers, no municipal sanitation system, no waste collection of any kind. Everything, and I mean everything, went straight into the streets. Human waste, kitchen scraps, dead livestock, rotting food. The gutters running along the sides of narrow cobblestone streets were essentially open sewers. The Thames was so polluted, it would eventually kill thousands, and the city smelled accordingly. Animals weren't treated any differently. Cats, dogs, stray ones, working ones that had died in the street, they weren't removed. Honestly, there was no system to remove them. They were just left where they fell. Some historians estimate that tens of thousands of stray animals lived and died in London's streets throughout this period. And when they died, they stayed right there. And if you're picturing something unpleasant, you're not wrong. Then came the rain, and in London, it rained a lot. When a real storm hit, the gutters couldn't contain the runoff, the streets flooded, and all of that accumulated filth, the waste, the debris, the bodies, got swept along with it. Historians believe that during the worst storms, Londoners looking down from their windows would literally see dead cats and dogs being carried through the rushing water below. The rain didn't create the problem. It just made it impossible to ignore. The rain didn't bring them, it revealed them. And that, most scholars believe, is where the phrase comes from. Not poetry, not mythology, just a description of what you actually saw outside your window on a bad day in 17th century London. The written trail backs this up. The earliest known version in print appears in 1652 in a play by a London playwright named Richard Brome called The City Wit. His line, "It shall rain dogs and polecats." Close, but not quite our version. A polecat is a weasel-like animal, common in Europe at the time. Brome was writing about city life in London, and his audience knew exactly what he meant. He wasn't inventing anything new. He was borrowing an image his audience had already seen with their own eyes. Then, in 1710, Jonathan Swift, yes, the same man who wrote Gulliver's Travels, wrote a poem called A Description of a City Shower. It is one of the most vividly unpleasant poems in English literature. Swift describes the build-up to a sudden London rainstorm and its grim aftermath in graphic detail, including specifically the dead animals swept along in the flood. He wasn't being figurative. He was being literal. He was documenting what every Londoner already recognized as a familiar sight. By 1738, Swift used the exact phrase, "raining cats and dogs," in a book cataloging everyday English expressions. At that point, he wasn't coining it. He was capturing it. The phrase was already in wide use across the city. Swift just wrote it down, and in doing so, he gave us the clearest evidence that by the early 18th century, this phrase was completely ordinary, just something people said. That said, you've probably heard other theories, so let's briefly go through them. The most popular alternative points to Norse mythology. Odin, the god of storms, was closely associated with dogs, wolves to be exact, and in some Norse folklore, Freya, the goddess of love and fertility, was said to travel through the sky with cats at her side. The idea being, a fierce storm was Odin's dogs running wild through the sky, and the cats represented the driving rain itself. It's a compelling image, and it kind of sounds like it could be true. But here's the problem. There is no documented evidence connecting Norse mythology to this specific phrase. None. It's one of those origin stories that feels satisfying, but has no paper trail. Historians call this folk etymology, a plausible story invented after the fact to explain something nobody actually traced at the time. Another theory traces the phrase to the Greek word katadup, meaning waterfall or cataract. The argument, the phrase evolved from describing rain so torrential, it was like a cataract of water falling from the sky. Linguistically, it's more interesting than the Norse theory. But again, no solid chain of documented evidence connecting the Greek term to the English idiom, and no intermediate steps showing how that word traveled through centuries into a common English expression. The most grounded explanation, the one with actual evidence, remains the unglamorous one: the streets, the floods, the animals. Here's what gets me about this. This phrase, which we all use casually, cheerfully, maybe with a little eye roll when you have to head out in the rain, it almost certainly began as a literal description of flooded streets lined with dead animals. People weren't being poetic. They weren't exaggerating for dramatic effect. They were just describing exactly what they saw outside their window on a bad storm day in London. And then 300 years passed. The streets got cleaned up. The sanitation systems were built. The great stink of 1858 finally forced London to construct its modern sewer system. And the city that Swift described slowly stopped looking like that. The image faded from living memory, and all that was left was the phrase, now cheerful, now harmless, now the thing you say when you forget your umbrella. That is what language does. It carries history that the words no longer show. The grimness gets polished away over centuries, until what's left looks like nothing more than a funny, slightly absurd expression. No smell, no context, no dead animals in the street. Just a phrase. So the next time it pours and someone says it's raining cats and dogs, you'll know. It started in the filthy, flooded alleys of 17th century London. A grim, practical observation made by people who had no choice but to see what was right outside their window. And now, it just means grab a jacket. Quick question before you go. Did we get you on this one, or did you already know? Drop it in the comments. And if there's a phrase you've always wondered about, leave it below. That's actually how we pick what comes next. Next time on Phrase Lore, we're looking at a phrase you've heard your whole life. One with a surprisingly dark history hiding right behind it. You are not going to see it coming. See you then.